Joel, as far as I remember, we planned to start our meeting of today with some sort of your small presentation.
Yes, I'm ready to do that.
Okay.
It's very piccolo, Catan.
Then, okay.
Yeah. Malinki.
Okay.
You know, there was a musical in the 1960s that had a song. Where it's about this guy who meets a Russian woman, and he says, "I'd like Malinki, that means a little. I'd like a Malchik, that means a boy. I'd like my own little Malinki Malchik. That's how in Russian we say little boy." You heard the song?
No, never.
Oh, oh, okay. Well, it's not a bad musical. I forget. It's called "Stop the World, I Want to Get Off."
Top of the world.
Mm.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah.
There is also another way of saying this.
Hmm. Yeah.
A person looks at the globe
Hmm.
thinking about where to migrate from Russia,
Yeah.
whether to this country or to this country.
Yeah.
Maybe you have another globe.
Oh. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Okay. I think we can start our meeting of today with Joel's small presentation. Catan, little.
Malinki. Yeah. Okay, let me share my screen. Uh, let's see. Are you seeing my screen yet? No. Yeah, you're seeing. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to talk about this chart, which I basically followed from Raymond Brown's John commentary, uh, which I have to say I learned most of what I know about exegesis through reading that commentary, and I'm basically following what he says there. But so his thesis is that there's two stories, two independent stories um, about Jesus being served by a woman, um, and in one of the stories is uh, the original of the Luke passage here. Though it's probably been changed some. I mean, Luke did know Mark, so it's not this story in its pure form. But in this story, uh, Jesus uh, is confronted by a woman uh, who weeps. A woman who is a sinner who weeps, falls in front of him, weeps on his feet, and then she dries his feet with her hair, which makes sense. She, she's there. She's so overcome by Jesus' personality and his compassion and so on, uh, that she becomes prostrate. She falls at his feet and she weeps. Her tears fall on his feet, and then she doesn't want his feet to get wet, uh, so she wipes off the tears, and the only thing that she has available, or perhaps as a sign of her humility, she uses her own hair to wipe off his feet. So that's the one story. Uh, and then the other story is the original of what we have in Mark, uh, where a woman comes and she brings a very expensive uh, collection of perfume in a jar, uh, and she breaks the jar and she pours the perfume on Jesus's head. Um, so that's the other story. The uh, the story of a woman who uh, before Jesus's death anoints his head, and the disciples or some onlookers get angry, and Jesus says that she's doing this for his death. She's anointing him for his death. Um, and um, and what John has done, the most interesting thing to me is John's version, because John seems to have combined these two stories. So in John, well, first of all, one of the things that you notice is that John gives this unnamed woman a name, calls her Mary of Bethany. And in John's story, the woman comes with this jar of alabaster, which is described in very similar terms to the way it is in Mark, making some people think that John is just copying Mark, that John has Mark right in front of him. I've always kind of resisted that, though that thesis seems to be gaining more and more currency, that John knew the synoptics in written form. Um, but in any case, in John, the most fascinating thing to me is that here the woman uh, doesn't anoint Jesus's head, as happens in Mark and as makes most sense, but she anoints his feet with this precious ointment, but then she dries it off with her hair, as in Luke. And when you think about this in terms of a realistic scene, uh, it doesn't make much sense that she would both anoint his feet with this precious ointment and then wipe it off. So what Brown says is that John has combined these two stories into one, the story of the woman, as in Luke, coming and weeping on the feet and then wiping off the tears with her hair, and the Markan story where Jesus is anointed on his head with precious ointment. And John has mixed those two stories. Just a couple of, or maybe one other note. I mean, one of the reasons that I have resisted the thesis that John knew the synoptics in written form is that there seem to be some elements in this and other Johannine stories which look older than the form in Mark. So, I mean, if John knew Mark, then he shouldn't have knowledge of a form of the story that is before Mark. But in this case, just one little detail, in John, the value of the precious ointment is 300 denarii. In Mark, it's more than 300 denarii. And that seems to me like a secondary feature. That is, it's not just 300 denarii, but it's more than that. That seems like a development of the tradition. Traditions really usually develop in the direction of a greater amount. And so that seems secondary. And so my working hypothesis, which again I learned from Brown, and up to this time I haven't stopped believing, is that John, even though his gospel is the latest of the gospels, it does have some contact with earlier forms of tradition, and therefore sometimes earlier forms of tradition which John maybe knew orally rather than in written form, sometimes those forms are earlier than the form that we get in the synoptics, even in our earliest synoptic gospel, Mark. But I think this is just a very interesting case for form and redaction criticism. You look at these traditions, they have something in common. The something in common is that Jesus is accosted by a woman who does something to his body, but maybe there were divergent forms of this very early on, and the stories diverged into these two different kinds of tradition with two different settings, one during the ministry, one near the end of Jesus' ministry. And there's different forms of these stories that are circulating, and John has combined these two perhaps divergent forms of the same story. So that's what I've got for you, relying on my long dead teacher, Raymond Brown. Questions, comments?
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
The evident problem with this idea is that we never see that Maria from Bethany was a sinner. And if John combined these two stories, in Luke, Maria is the sinner.
Yeah. So the question is, where does this Mary of Bethany identification come from?
Yeah,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. I mean, the story in Mark already is taking place in Bethany. So, um, so again, yeah, maybe this is a historical memory of something that happened to Jesus in Bethany shortly before he was killed. I mean, it seems a little bit, just thinking about it, it seems a little bit redundant to call her Mary of Bethany after John has already identified the setting of the story as being in Bethany. And of course, in the later development of the tradition, this Mary of Bethany is further identified with Mary Magdalene, who, I assume that isn't the identity, that that's the merging of two different characters, one quite well known and remembered since she was there at Jesus's tomb, and the other of whom we don't really know very much.
Yes, but in any case, the introduction of Mary of Bethany in John goes hand in hand with John's introduction of the whole story about Lazarus' resurrection and about his sisters Mary and Martha.
Right.
So, having introduced this whole story and Lazarus' family in his gospel, John probably was provoked by this introduction to identify some of the members of this family with some of the heroes of the tradition he had, earlier tradition that he had before him.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I mean, you do, just to repeat, I mean, you do see often in the development of tradition, nameless characters become named. And that you can see that all over the place in the apocryphal gospels. So what's the name of the centurion who was there at Jesus's death? He isn't named in any of the canonical gospels. He gets a name in the later development of the tradition. But yeah, your theory makes sense. And of course, yeah, in John, the setting of the Lazarus story right before this anointing at Bethany, couples a story in which Jesus talks about his death and resurrection, before he heals Lazarus, with the beginning of the Passion events. But yeah, I don't know. I'm most excited about the, the anointing of John's turning it into an anointing of the feet rather than anointing of the head, and them, drying the anointing oil off with the hair, and you know, just that seems really cool to me, the way John has combined those two traditions, and that's an obvious kind of fingerprint of the fact that he has combined those two traditions.
Yes, I think that especially the idea of anointing something with precious oil and then wiping it with one's hair is so strange
Mhm.
that the suggestion to understand this as a combination of Markan story and Lucan story is probably the only more or less rational way of explaining this.
Yes,
But even
I think so. Though
yes,
Tom Wright would say, it's so strange it must be true. But I don't really buy that. No.
yes, but even if John combined traditions that he borrowed from Mark and Luke, still it may well be that original traditions that we meet in Mark and Luke go back to the same tradition, the same memory, because John omits mentioning that this anointing took place in the house of Simon,
Mhm.
but both Mark and Luke state this. And of course, Shimon is a rather common name,
Mhm.
but still the combination of the explicit mention of the house of Simon with the image of a woman that anoints Jews either with her tears or with precious oil is still not so common as the name of Simon itself. So
Yeah, I mean there are similarities between the two stories, and I mean I don't think that the Lucan story is, the pure original form of the story because, it combines the anointing with the weeping on the feet. So that's already an amalgamation of um, Mark's, story of an anointing with presumably another story that didn't have anything to do with an anointing. Um, but so, I mean, this is all speculative, but that's what makes most sense to me.
yes, but even if some people doubt whether John knew the synoptics or not, uh, we do not doubt, at least within the mainstream understanding of the history of the gospel formation, that Luke did know Mark.
Correct.
So,
Yeah. So it's like a contamination, of the Lucan story by the Markan story. If you saw it in text, you would say this is a contaminated text. Um,
okay, but if the Lucan story is still different from the Markan, can we say that Luke, in his either in Q or in his own material, had this story, but then
that's what I would say. Yeah. Now, I wouldn't necessarily attribute it to Q, but Luke knows a lot of stories, and as he says in his prologue, right?
yes, of course. But if there was in his source or in his tradition a story of a sinner woman who weeps on feet of Jesus and dries them with her hair,
Mhm.
and he brought some material from Mark 14 into the story, like mentioning of the house of Simon
Mhm.
and the alabaster jar with
Mhm.
perfume. then why did he omit the Markan story in the place where Mark has it?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the only answer I can think of is, I can think of other examples where Luke moves a story which appears later in other gospels to an earlier place, and the premier example of that is what the Germans called the Reiche Fischfang, the big collection of fish in the nets, which in John is a post-resurrectional story. And it seems to me that that's probably the original story setting of that story. And Luke has moved it way back into the beginning of Jesus' ministry. So maybe, Luke, I don't know exactly why, but it does conform to what we see Luke doing elsewhere, and that is retrojecting stories. But why he left this story out, I don't know. It does paint the disciples in a bad light, and Luke, we can see elsewhere, is concerned to rehabilitate the disciples to a certain extent. So maybe that would be a possible explanation. But I don't know. It's why is something not there is often a tricky question.
May I add something?
Please.
I think, well, for me, this this story or different stories, they are very good example of the situation when our understanding depends, like, or maybe even is defined by the axioms that we use, like, before we read the text. Like, for example, in different in the readers who read these stories in different times, they come to completely different conclusions because they start with different axioms. Like, for example, in like late Byzantine era, like Theophylactus of Bulgaria, when he wants to have complete harmony between the Gospels, and therefore, if there is even slight difference, he says that these are different stories, that these are different women, because one of them is in the beginning of the Jesus story, another one is at the end, and so if he has even slight differences, so he comes to the conclusion that these were all different women.
Or a similar thing would be two cleansings of the temple.
Exactly, right? Exactly. So each time there is some difference, he would say that these are different people and different stories, and so that's one extreme way of looking at things. Another extreme way would be to say that these are all different accounts of the same story, and all the differences would be done on purpose in order to symbolically or in some way to convey the message that the narrator wants to. And so so your way of reading this here is, so you don't go into, so the extremities would be like 3 and 1, so either it's 3 different women or one like the same woman. So you propose to say that it's neither, but it's 2. So that's very interesting, I think, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important observation. And I mean, and I didn't start out reading the Gospels in this way. When I became a Christian, I was a harmonizer,
Mhm.
and but it's just one thing I found was it became really difficult to harmonize sometimes, and I had to do all sorts of contortions in order to harmonize these different stories. And then I would read, conservative commentators saying, well, these are obviously all talking about the same thing, and only if you have closed your eyes to the truth will you not see that. And even though I wanted to believe that, it smelled bad to me. And I guess I would say that I think, the Enlightenment way of reading things, to acknowledge discrepancies between stories and to try to figure out a path for the development of the tradition. It has two advantages sometimes. One, it's less arbitrary, and two, it's more interesting. Um, Now, then after, but of course, that it does also raise issues of biblical authority and, how one understands the authority of the text that also have to be dealt with. But yes, yeah, I like your observation about two different ways of, dealing with a discrepancy in the text. Um, yeah, and of course, yeah, it all, people were operating with similar assumptions um, for many, many centuries. Although I think if you go back, you'll see, of course, church fathers and before them the rabbis seeing that there are difficulties in the text, um, and then trying to deal with them in a way that is in line with their own ideas of biblical authority.
Yes.
Okay, should I stop sharing my screen, or do you want to talk about this some more?
I also wanted to make a very small comment on what we discussed last time about the fate of this alabaster jar that was broken. And during our last meeting, I searched on how it is the burial rites, but I didn't have time to comment last time, so I will comment now. So I found because I remembered that when I went to the expeditions to the Russian north, I discussed with the elderly people there in the villages on the burial rites, and I was told many times that the they break the jars that they use to wash the dead bodies. And so yes, I didn't remember it very clearly. So yes, I found it in the book. So for example, in Olga Sedakova's book on the burial rites, in the Slav tradition in general, that yes, they really that's true. They break so they use the jar, they put the water and they use it to wash the dead body, and after that they break it so that it wouldn't be used again. So, well, at least, well, it's a natural thing. So probably many different in different regions, people would tend to do similar things. So.
Of course, it's possible that that's influenced by the biblical accounts too, though. So, at least that would be a possible explanation. But you found people saying that the reason that they break the jar is so that it will be consecrated to this use alone, so that it won't be used again.
No. I don't remember that. No. I just remember that they break it. I don't remember if they explain that this way.
Interesting.
Do we have any more questions or remarks on these stories of a woman anointing Jesus' body with her tears or with perfume in the four Gospels?
One other way in which Mark's story is more developed than John's story is only, well, in Mark rather than in John, Jesus ends up by saying, what she has done will be proclaimed in the whole world. And that seems like a secondary feature, and it has some vocabulary that is particularly characteristic of Mark. So again, while in general John is a more developed gospel theologically, there are these instances where John gives us a more stripped down, kind of bare account of something that is also in Mark or the other synoptics. And you just wonder if John was actually reading Mark, say, wouldn't he have included that last line about it will be proclaimed in the whole world? That seems to be in line with John's overall theology. So why isn't it there if he knew Mark? So those are the things, that's the sort of thing that gives me pause, and why I haven't jumped totally onto the bandwagon yet of John as a reader of one or more synoptic gospels. There are common, the alternative theory is that there are common traditions that both the synoptic gospels, Mark first and John, also have developed in line with their own theologies. Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen, and we can get back to our regularly scheduled program.
Thank you very much. I would like also to say, but it's maybe more emotional rather than scientific comment about this. How Mark says that it will be proclaimed in all the world. That I always found it as a example of like performative saying that precisely by writing this, it is proclaimed in the whole world. So precisely when Mark writes it, so precisely by writing it, it makes it proclaimed in the whole world. So that's kind of performative.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good observation that, that Mark has his eye on, he's telling a story about what happened during Jesus' lifetime, but he also has his eye on his own audience. And, if you think about the messianic secret in Mark, I mean, Jesus keeps telling people not to say what he has done or what he says, but of course the reader hears all these things. So for the reader it is not a secret, and there's a kind of dramatic contrast between what the reader knows and what the characters in the story know. So I think that's a very helpful comment.
Thank you, Joel.
Now I'll subside into silence.
Okay, we discussed last time the reason for these, the reason for the woman not just to pour the precious liquid out of the alabaster, but to break it. And the idea emerged that probably this breaking had something to do with funeral rites, because Mark explicitly connects this anointment with Jesus' future burial. I looked at the commentaries, not at all, but at least at some commentaries on Mark at this place, including your commentary, Joel. But I haven't noticed any special investigations or even ideas to investigate whether rites like these were really popular in the world that was the context of Markan narrative. I would be grateful, Joel, if you can help me be looking whether there were some studies on this particular topic, trying to find some archaeological parallels to what we see here in Mark. But I decided to look for these parallels myself. And having looked through some materials on the Greek funeral rites, I found some interesting publications. Let me share them with you. Okay. Do you see the page?
Yes.
That's a paper on the ritual breaking of objects in Greek funerary contexts. And note, the author investigates some examples of what he called the ritual breaking of objects in Greek funerary contexts. And what is especially interesting is the kind of jars that especially mentioned by him. He spoke about some tombs that were excavated by his archaeological team, about the grave goods, and he especially mentions the difference between the treatment of alabaster and the treatment of other kind of pottery, like krateriskoi. The krateriskoi were found immediately outside the tomb, and even they were shattered. He had the impression that they were shattered just accidentally when filling the tomb, filling the grave with earth. These natural breakages contrasted strangely with that encountered in the other waste type, namely the alabaster. As concerns the alabaster, he continues, All 5 alabaster that were found had been broken, and the parts placed in or about the tomb in such a way as to leave no doubt that the breakage was deliberate and ritualistic, and that took place at the very time of burial. It especially strikes me that this is true only with regard to the same type of vessels that we have in Mark, namely the alabaster. From this particular excavation, he goes to another grave. Once more, a crateriscos had been broken with the pounding of the earth on top of the hole. So incidentally, inside the tomb only 2 votives occurred. The other was another alabaster, also broken into 2 pieces, both of which had been placed by the right shoulder, and the deliberateness of this act is shown by the fact that both had been set upright, namely both pieces. And he regards some other tombs where also the alabaster was treated in a very special way, namely differently from other types of vessels. The alabaster were deliberately broken. It is tempting to suggest that in all 3 cases, adult male athletes were buried with their alabaster broken with their interment. Perhaps the containers of oil for anointing their bodies were considered so personal that the alabaster had to be ritually killed to accompany their owners. He said that he was not aware of any close parallels to this situation in other necropolis of the Greek world, but I tried to pursue this topic further. He refers also to another necropolis, yes. Once again, the 3 alabaster had been broken into 2 portions when buried in the tomb.
And who is the author of that? Because I see that it's McGill. It's in McGill. Is it a recent work or not?
No, it's 1985.
Okay.
It's 1985.
Mhm.
A paper by John Fossey.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I
that's
also
interesting.
tried. Yes.
I should have seen that article. Thank you. If there's ever a second edition of my commentary, I'll make a note.
Okay.
But why
And
does he? But does he have a theory of why alabaster is different from other materials? Just that alabaster is associated with athletes, and athletes, are associated with something that is personal to them.
probably because alabaster was the most natural container for some for some oil for anointing person. Other type of vessels were either for wine or for water. Alabaster were specifically just for oil, either precious or just ordinary oil for anointing the bodies of athletes. I also found another paper, also probably unknown for the author of a previous paper, also from the Greek world. An overall study of the final assemblages showed that the burial rituals was not only limited to the deposit of the bodies, their personal belongings. Amphorae, storage vessels, and various jugs found in the prodromos may have been used for libations for the post-funerary nourishment of the dead. The fact that the lower part of these vessels is frequently missing suggests that they could have been shattered in a sequence of a ritual breakage. So once again, we have an archaeological witness, though in this case not so concentrated on the alabaster, that also speaks about ritual breakage of vessels after they're being used for ritual libations, so anointments in the funerary rites. What is interesting, I also tried to look for these customs in the Jewish world, whether this practice or something like this was mentioned in the rabbinic literature, or whether we have any archaeological evidence of similar rites in the Jewish world. But I couldn't find any parallels from the Jewish world. And this may be interesting also for our understanding of the history of the gospel tradition. If this custom is specifically associated not with the Jewish world, but with the Greek world, then we may concentrate on the fact that the special emphasis on the cross, on passion, and on Jesus' death and Jesus' burial was especially characteristic of the Gospel of Mark. For Mark, this is an important topic. And even when comparing this story of the woman anointing Jesus with precious oil, comparing it with other Gospels, some scholars comparing different versions of this story and seeing as we saw it now that Mark puts a special emphasis on the connection of this story with Jesus' burial, suggests that this specific connection, which is missing, for example, in Luke, yes, as we have seen it, the specific connection with burial was made by Mark and probably goes hand in hand with his special emphasis on the passion narrative. And if we look at our archaeological background from this point of view, it may well be that the fact that such burial customs are tested primarily in the heathen context, in the Greek context, may go hand in hand with the idea that this element in the story was brought by Mark already when the story made its way from the Jewish context of original Christianity to the heathen context of the Markan context, Markan community. What would you say about this?
Well, that's possible. I mean, I take it from these studies, this isn't that common a phenomenon, so I guess I'd be a little hesitant. about, drawing big conclusions about, this being a Greco-Roman context, Greco-Roman custom rather than a Jewish one. I'm kind of intrigued by the previous article where it talks about these vessels being ritually killed. So I take it that he's sort of combining, archaeological observation probably with anthropological filling in. And so that's just interesting, at least methodologically. I don't think probably ancient Greeks talked about ritual objects being ritually killed so that they could be, at least I'm not aware of anything like that. It reminds me of some stories I've heard about, pharaohs in Egypt and their burials. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know a whole lot about archaeology, but it seems to me that archaeological artifacts are even more difficult to interpret than texts. And so I don't know. These are very interesting, and especially the previous article by Mr. Fossey. And I wish I had seen it before I treated this passage.
Yes, the topic of ritual breaking of objects as a funeral rite, I found was extensively treated by some anthropologists, like, for example, Grinsell, the breaking of objects as a funeral rite. This is, do you see the paper now? No?
Yes.
Yes, yes. This is not, this paper, differently from the previous that I cited, centers not so much on the archaeological background, but rather on general anthropological background of this. So it's, in some sense, this may be regarded as a theoretical background for the Greek customs that we observed in the archaeological reports, and at the same time for the North Russian burial customs that Father Leonid mentioned earlier, and also for this strange image in Mark of a woman breaking the alabaster. What really seems strange to me that at least as far as I saw, this topic was not specifically investigated by Markan scholars.
Yeah, it's an opportunity for someone to write an article. You or
Okay.
one of your students, yeah.
Okay. We can do.
I mean, it does, yeah. It does remind me of, I guess I've always been interested in these discussions of ideas of afterlife in ancient Israel. And, the classic account is, that they didn't have, much of an idea of a blessed afterlife, like everybody goes to Sheol. And yet, again, that's in some tension with some of the archaeological stuff, and also just expressions like he was gathered to his fathers. I mean, what does that mean? Does that just mean, that he was buried in the same place as his fathers had been buried, or does it attest to some belief that was there in a in a blessed afterlife that just, doesn't emerge in the early strands of the Old Testament?
Yes, it's a good question. Probably the problem is not that it doesn't emerge in the early state of the Old Testament. Probably the reason is that the early state of the Old Testament, where this idea might have been represented, were later purged by the Deuteronomistic ideology, because all these ideas of beatific afterlife and posthumous existence were very close to the idea of communication with the world, of the dead, necromancy and so on, which was a special abomination for the Deuteronomistic ideology. So probably they just purged the ancient Hebrew culture and the ancient Hebrew literature from anything that might have been close or resembling any ideas of contact with the other world, with the world of the dead, with necromancy. And together with this, they threw away the whole idea of beatific afterlife.
Yeah,
It
that's
may well be
interesting.
that
Well, it's,
what, yes?
no, I mean, it's kind of parallel to the way also, that there's traces in the Old Testament of the idea of a chaos kampf, of a primordial battle between God and
Yes.
chaos monster. You get it in the Psalms, you get it in Isaiah, but the account in Genesis 1 seems to be demythologized, right?
Yeah, so it may well be that the oldest layers of the Old Testament that we have now are not the oldest state of the Hebrew religion, but rather the result of a late development, very much edited by the Deuteronomists or other people who were responsible for the creation of the canon of the Pentateuch and the prophets.
Do I remember it correctly that this in this saying, like was gathered to his fathers? It's very like archaic because it's the word yes, is used for father or like forefather.
Yes, but
think
it's another kind of worms, because the meaning of this word is also disputed. But in any case, it looks as if the expression is really archaic for the time of writing of the Old Testament, of the Old Testament texts as we have them. Yes.
Where is this article about breaking of objects as a funerary rite?
Well, I can send all of them to you.
Oh,
In fact,
great.
we can write a paper together on
Okay,
these things.
as soon as I finish my book.
Okay, but
Okay.
or maybe we can do it even earlier.
Yeah. I tell you what, you draft the article and I'll edit it.
Okay, agreed. Yes, I will also have a comment from Yelena, a specialist in classical Greek and Roman cultures, that the form of alabastron excluded the massive use of its content. Yelena, can you maybe say some additional words about this?
Меня слышно?
Слышно, но не видно.
Вот не могу понять, почему, но да, ладно. Я ничего не могу сказать по существу глубинному, у меня сугубо такой от здравого смысла и развития текста. Вопрос о том, зачем разбивать, это же так дорого. И просто если посмотреть на эти самые алабастры, из них же по капельке выливали. То есть из него вылить сразу много, в принципе, невозможно, не разбив. И, может быть, здесь изначально мотив именно такой щедрости, а уже как он дальше переосмысливался, это другой разговор. Но это, конечно, совсем иное направление, нежели то, о чем вы говорили.
Но это надо провести то, что называется эксперимент. Надо взять реальный греческий алабастр, ну или попросить кого-нибудь сделать современную копию алабастра и посмотреть, с какой скоростью может оттуда вытекать драгоценное масло. Вот.
Да, это, разумеется, это очень умозрительное рассуждение. А по поводу того, что по-разному бились разные предметы, вот то, что было в статьях о том, как они расположены, это, конечно, очень убедительно. Ну, вообще-то они из разных материалов. То есть прочие это всякие чаши глиняные, а алабастр это все-таки из стеклянной пасты. То есть вот.
Ну да, но вряд ли их разный физический состав мог отвечать за то, что они вот так были найдены, как описывают.
Нет, это как раз вот то, как они найдены, это очень убедительно. Я к тому, что это может быть даже лишний аргумент к тому, что алабастр можно разбить только специально. Сам по себе он особенно так не разобьется. В то время как всякие там гидри, кратеры и прочие гораздо легче.
Да.
Вот, собственно, все.
Кстати, знаете, вот этот рассказ про то, как нашли в могилах кусочки алабастров, напомнил, я позвольте немножко отвлечься, известный анекдот про то, как один человек хотел сделать подарок начальнику. Вот, но при этом, чтобы не очень много денег потратить. И увидел драгоценную какую-то вазу, которую в магазине у него на глазах разбили. О, говорит он, пожалуйста, вот эту вазу доставьте по такому-то адресу, как подарок от такого-то, такого-то, такому-то, такому-то. Вазу доставили. На другой день встречается военачальника и говорит, ну вот, послал вам подарок. Пришли только обломочки. Ах, какой ужас! Как же так они разбили? Но каждый обломочек был завернут в отдельную обложечку.
Да, у меня, кстати, есть встречная история, тоже совершенно такая. Папа мой когда-то откуда-то из далеких стран вез домой страусиное яйцо пустое такое, сувенирное. Нес его в руках, в пакетике. И буквально на пороге квартиры он его разбил. Уронил и разбил. Но это было именно в пакетике, поэтому потом отдал мастерам, которые смогли его склеить из мельчайших кусочков. Ну, в общем, это вот немножко в пандан.
Okay. Joel, sorry for our small discussion in Russian.
That's perfectly
Yes.
fine.
Yes. Elena also pointed that usually the alabaster were made not from ordinary clay as normal pottery, but from the stuff which is harder and more difficult to break. So probably in addition to the placement of different parts of the same vessel that indicate that the vessel was broken before the actual interment, or at least before the actual filling of the grave with earth. Glenn says that it is much more difficult to break alabaster by chance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
that's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and of course, like Yelena's argument that you could only uh y- use this alabaster for like for very small quantities, and so in order to I thought that like modern analogy would be like if you want to use the whole like rolling deodorant or spray, then you would have to break it, because so in our times there also exist like the jars that you have to break in order to use it at once.
Mm, the
So,
seal.
But still, it's a very interesting topic. I like such cross-disciplinary
Yeah.
studies.
I was wondering what you were saying about a Deuteronomic editing out of the cult of the dead. Have people? I assume that people have written extensively about this. Uh, is that right?
Yes, I like the name of the book by Margaret Barker, The Older
Oh,
Testament.
oh yeah.
She wrote extensively about many things, and not everything that she wrote I would believe or recommend as reading to my students. But the expression, the Older Testament,
Uh,
I like it.
yeah.
It really says and emphasizes the idea that what we do have with the Old Testament is maybe a very much edited and censored collection of the beliefs and religious practices of
Yeah.
ancient Jews.
She's always been a little bit wild for me, but I know, people who get things out of her stuff. So that's
Yes, quite a lot of what she wrote is completely crazy.
yeah.
So I remember her just because of this expression, the Older Testament. Maybe even if this is the only her real contribution to the world of the biblical studies, still it's a significant contribution.
Yeah.
It's a
I
good
remember
expression.
her being mentioned at one of our seminars in Moscow. It seemed to me like maybe she even had some connection with Russia, but I can't remember what the details of that were.
I don't remember either. It seems that she had just friendly relations either with Metropolitan Hilarion or with some of his assistants.
Yeah, I think he mentioned her to me, and the other thing I'd like to mention, this is an obvious point, but this anointing of Jesus replaces what should have happened on Easter Sunday, right? I mean, the women
Yes.
go to the tomb in order to anoint him, but his body is not there.
Yes. So if it were not for this scene, Jesus would have been left unanointed at all, which is contrary to the Jewish burial customs.
Well, and again, if we're thinking anthropologically, why anthropologically and also physically, I mean, why are dead bodies anointed with perfume? I mean, it's partly, because if you don't do that, then they probably start to smell bad anyway. But I would think that an anthropologist would also come up with explanations such as, to enable a easier passing to the next world, so that God doesn't turn up his nose at the person when he comes into his presence.
Yes, may I add something? I think two things, like about the last thing you said, I think that maybe in the context of Jewish funeral, this practical thing that the body doesn't smell bad isn't relevant, because well, it's like the Jewish burial is done like immediately, and so without any real, so it's not like it's done like in, I don't know, in Orthodox tradition, like on the third on the day, or when it lies in the church for some time and then it starts. So maybe
Yeah.
it's really like more really ritualistic rather than practical. But what I wanted to say is, if there will be this article, I think like one should consider like three different. I think there are three logical possibilities for this breaking of alabaster included in the gospel narrative. So the first one being the practical reason that if you want to use the whole oil, you have to break it. So whether it's true or not, and the things behind this idea. So that's the first like possibility. The second possibility is that it's done because it is connected with the burial rite. So it was common to break so whether it's true or not, so to consider this possibility that maybe this detail about breaking of the jar must remind of the burial rites. And the third possibility, I think is also possible, that it's there just to have the more like sharp contrast with Judas. Like we have the Judas who is greedy and who doesn't want this money to be used, or he in the name right near this passage there is a passage how he gets the money for betrayal, and so, and this woman is generous, and she not only uses the whole oil but also breaks the jar, so she's uh, like illogically generous, and he's greedy in the neighboring passages. So maybe it's there for this reason. So I think that there are like three options, more or less.
Yeah, and there could be combinations of those.
Mm-hmm.
I guess from, the little looking that I did, that I recall, doing into customs associated with this story, though, it seemed to me that most of the archaeological evidence was that people would generally, just, stop up the bottles of things with like a rag, so you don't have to break it. And I mean, or a rag or a cork. I'm not sure if they had corks, but generally the vessels that we know about were, they weren't sealed shut, but they had a, something that was plugging the hole, so you don't have to destroy them. I mean, it seems to me that there must be some symbolism associated with this, and we've come up with some interesting theories about it.
Yes, I looked at the alabaster, pictures of alabaster. Of course, it's not so easy to pull something out of the alabaster as from a hydra, but still it seems that normally maybe not so quick as from a crusher, but you still can pour the contents of the alabaster out without necessity to breaking this. So probably from this point of view, it's not the same thing as with modern deodorants, where you really need to do something with the bottle if you want to completely empty it. But I think that the idea of looking for archaeological and anthropological background for this breaking is an interesting perspective for commenting, for additional commenting on this difficult text.
Yeah, it is really interesting.
And what do you think about the idea if we find out that this breaking of jars and alabaster in connection with the funeral rites is more characteristic of the Greek world than of the Jewish world? How would you think about connecting this to the Gentile context of Mark?
I think that's I think that's a possible explanation. I'd like to think about it some more. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what I want to say about, the overall historicity of this story. But it's never struck me as one of the ones that I should question the historicity of it. But if you were right, and if this sort of thing was more characteristic of Hellenistic customs than of Jewish customs, then I would have to rethink that.
No, I'm not talking about the whole story. The very fact that it exists in several variants may indicate that the story is deeply rooted in the early Christian traditions. But as far as I remember, the breaking is something peculiar to Mark. And while not discussing all the details of the story, concentrating specifically on the idea of breaking, I would rather ask whether we have a Gentile context, Gentile influence, not in the whole matter of the story, but at least as concerns this particular detail.
Yeah, possible. I can't honestly remember whether the breaking is carried over in the other Gospels or in which of them it is. So, yeah, I'd have to look into it. I'd have to think about it some more.
Yeah.
You've given my brain a workout today, so.
Thank you. I also wanted to discuss this with our archaeologists. We have a department of classical and Asian archaeology just next door to our chair of ancient Near East. So I think it may be a good idea for cross-disciplinary research.
Which is always a good idea.
Yeah.
Didn't one of the people from that department come to some of the seminars in Moscow? I can't remember what his name was. He was very athletic.
Very athletic.
Athletic, yeah. He even came to Bulgaria, this guy I'm thinking of. And the first thing he did was to swim in the Black Sea. somehow he got to Bulgaria even, after the Ukraine war began. I can't remember what his.
Professor Ivanchik, the head of this department, is very athletic and is a very good swimmer. And
okay, maybe that was him.
and since he also has a French citizenship, it may well be that he's the guy you're talking about.
Okay, what's his Christian name? His first name.
Askold.
I'm not sure that was the guy, but you probably have a lot of athletic archaeologists there. So.
Okay. Today we had two papers, in fact. Joel's paper on Jesus' anointment in the four Gospels and how John probably combines. I think this is a very good idea that John combines two traditions, which results in a very strange scene. And then I also prepared not a paper, but materials for a paper, an archaeological background of breaking alabaster.
Yeah, your paper was very interesting, more interesting than mine, I have to say. So, thank you for that.
Thank you for your paper, Joel.
What we can.
But these two papers took, in fact, almost all our time slot that we have. So whether, Joel, both of you are to be applauded or thanked, or contrary to this, blamed for using our precious time. But at least we did what we could and what we wanted. I hope that it was interesting for those present.
Yes, I always think of, I had a class with Louis Feldman, the Josephus scholar once from Yeshiva University, and he told us a story about one of his professors that he was reading Greek with. I forget what text they were reading, but the professor would come into the class and he would say, and they were moving very slowly, and he would come into the class and he would say, "How many hundreds of lines are we behind today?" So, but we have no fixed schedule, so we're not behind.
Yes.
And hopefully we will finish before the eschaton.
This depends primarily not on us, but on the speed with which eschaton arrives.
Yeah. But if it looks like it's, really approaching, then we should hurry up so we can finish the gospel.
Okay. Let's try next time to be in a hurry in order to be ready for the eschaton. Okay. So we see each other next Thursday at the same time.
Good. Yeah. До свидания. До скорого.
До свидания, друзья. Надеюсь, вам было не очень скучно.
До свидания.